Up next, we have Abbas Haider Ali talking about proactive alerting and intelligent communications with xMatters. Ladies and gentlemen, the CTO of xMatters, Abbas Haider Ali. Give him a big round of applause, please.
Thanks, guys. So this is a nice small group, so it's easy to have like a pretty casual conversations. Actually, if you want to do questions throughout, we can. It's small enough to be able to facilitate something like that. So just as a quick point of introduction, I won't do a whole lot of like technology stuff about what xMatters does. I can in context of as we talk, but people always ask me saying, hey, for the topic we're talking about, what kind of gives you some background in this particular area? So just a little bit of background about myself. I'm Canadian, if that makes any difference. I've had several roles in kind of technology over the last probably a scary amount of time. It gets scarier the more I think about it, so I'm not actually going to give you a time frame. But I started off my career doing field work for IBM. I covered a pretty broad region. It was all of Ontario. And that was basically, so that in terms of size, that probably covers about like the northeastern United States in terms of space. And it was when I was too young to actually officially get a rental car, but they were nice enough to give me one to drive around when I didn't have my own car. It was totally awesome. I did not mind like the 10, 12-hour drives I used to do on a regular basis. It's totally amazing. But I did field support for a lot of organizations at that time for IBM services. So that gave me a lot of experience, kind of hands-on stuff with, tearing apart servers, where there's literally a town that's made up of four buildings, those sorts of areas, into kind of cities, mining towns, all kinds of different work. As well as, of course, major cities in Ontario, like Toronto, Ontario, and Ottawa, places like that. So I spent my time there. After that, I spent a lot of time at OPNET Technologies. Any of you familiar with OPNET Technologies at all? So they started off actually doing a lot of network modeling and network simulation software. So I got pretty deep into network stack sort of stuff. So I did a lot of work in developing mobile ad hoc network technologies. Some of the Wi-Fi channel, systems we take for granted today, like 802.11a, for example. I actually did some of the design work back in the day on some of the modeling layer of that stuff. A bunch of network capacity planning things, APM pieces, but in general, performance management was a big focus of mine in that area, from very, very low level into application layer pieces. After that, I had spent some time in the business service management world with managed objects. My role there was really product strategy and product management. In that function, I used to spend a lot of time with our clients, deciding on how they would actually capture what the infrastructure alerting layers meant at the higher levels. So as an example of some really cool projects I worked on, was helping design for Customs and Border Patrol. So if you've ever gone through a border crossing, you realize that if a crossing stops working, bad things happen, right? It tends to back up very quickly. One of the things that they had was there's a lot of technology all over the world that kind of pool that information together. So think of all the infrastructure that comes into places. Readers, now things like retina scanners and fingerprint scanners, network gear, secure stuff that are used to proxy things from international locations, then central kind of edge network stuff within the United States, then kind of core networks, transports, locations, servers, applications, all that stuff together. What they were looking for was service views. So they'd be able to go through and say, we had some weird reader fail in like a pre-clearance center in Abu Dhabi, and we want to know what that actually means to delay times and our ability to process passengers there. What kind of issues should we see over there? Will we expect a backlog, which creates security risk? They would do that for border crossings in Mexico, Canada, all that kind of stuff as well. There's really translating technology layers into business services and sharing that across different audiences. That was technology executives, government folks, contractors, things like that. That's one example. So I did a lot of stuff with large financial institutions, insurance companies, a lot of work in that stuff and translating technology and raw piece of infrastructure into business services and modeling that. At xMatters, one of the things that our company does, we're really kind of a core communication platform at the end of the day, and we are in the business of relaying information from something to a person and back as quickly as possible. Apply to the IT world, we'll talk about lots of those examples, but generally that means when you have some key piece of information about the technology that you're serving up, how do you get that into the right hands of the person for them to take some sort of action? It could be something as simple as approving a change. It could be a heads up that says, hey, we've got a major outage. There's a conference call you need to join right now. Here's the information, or it'll actually pull you in automatically. Lots of different variations on that sort of theme. The idea there is information to person and back and take some sort of action. That's generally what we wind up doing within the IT sphere. when I look at technology, I tend to take a very persona-centric view of what technology serves for people. So breaking out a meme from, this is probably actually a couple of years old now, this particular meme, right? So when people look at the roles of what a network engineer does, and this applies, of course, to lots of different personas, right? Whether you're a sysadmin, you run a database, you run an application service, you're kind of you run a support team, you're on a help desk, there's different views and roles and responsibilities that you have, right? And different people think you do different things. But the reality is we all serve lots of different functions. So a day in the life of a network person, I use that example because I spend a lot of time with network people, right? So if you look at the typical list of things that are a network person's set of things, there may be a project they're involved with. Hey, we're doing a data center migration. We're doing kind of a merger with another company. We're growing out a new site. We're deploying a new location. Things that are kind of net new things, right? They're like a project sort of activity. They tend to be break-fix sort of stuff. Right, hey, we've got, someone called in, they've got a problem, it escalated, it came to me, and I've got to fix it. There's changes that they're testing out in the lab and approving them to go into a schedule change window. They're part of like a SWAT team solving a major incident. They're dealing with day-to-day sorts of maintenance activities. There's lots of different roles and responsibilities that everyone in an IT organization has. And that if you apply it across every different function that you have, it becomes a lot of different roles. And the reality is when you add these roles together, you're kind of needed in some capacity, potentially 24/7. When we look at kind of where people are when they're going to be, the odds that you're going to be exactly where you can help out in the problem at that point in time are actually pretty low, right? So when you really think about it, you could be in a meeting, right? So hey, there's something going on that's important. You're in a meeting. How do you know that the thing that is the most important that's happening of all the roles you fill are happening there right now? Right? It's kind of important to be able to communicate to someone when they're in a meeting so it's not disruptive, but gets their attention if it's important enough to override the meeting, right? So as an example, if you're running a business and one of your critical business applications is down, the fact that you're in a change review meeting that happens every single week, probably not as important, right? But how do you separate that from all the other things that are taking place? That's one example of where it could be. It could be in the bowels of a data center. I've had this experience. You're down there, you're working, I used to do a lot of work for Department of Defense and intelligence agencies. You literally wind up in places where there is no signals, nothing, right? Then you come outside to get some fresh air, and your phone explodes, just going crazy. You're like, what the hell has been going on in the last hour, right? All kinds of crazy things starts to happen. You could be stuck in traffic, right? You're commuting, whether you're on the side riding a bike or in the car. You're commuting somewhere, and you're basically in transit. You need information to make decisions right away. You could be sleeping. That tends to happen a lot if you're on call. So when I used to do field support, it was always 2 o'clock in the morning, something would go wrong, right? I'd driven for 12 hours, I'd finished up some stuff, but because I was in the area and the closest technical person, that's when my phone would go off, right? And you're like, I would just like to sleep right now. Or of course, you could wind up in the bathroom, which is also it's surprisingly, when we actually do statistical analysis of where did you get that most critical alert, it's surprising what percentage of people get the first message of something being wrong when they're actually in the restroom and have to take some sort of action there. I don't want to know what percentage that translates into smartphones dropping into, getting I don't even want to know what goes on there, but there is some sort of correlation there potentially that takes place. But the reality is you kind of need to be able to deal with stuff wherever you happen to be. So when I go to talk to clients, remember I said I'm very persona-centric, I ask them, I say, okay, in context of your role right now, what are the things that you would need in order to be successful from a communication standpoint? And I build this out by different processes. So if I take a look at an incident management process, they might say, look, what I need to know is when I get information sent my way, I want to be able to accept a ticket from wherever I am because it frees up everybody else on my team. Or equally importantly, I want to say, I can't take this ticket because I'm busy doing something else, go find my backup, right? So you've got lots of different conditions where that could take place and so on. There's a whole bunch of different potential communication processes that take place to engage someone. You can keep going down the list, right? Remember I said persona perspective, right? Incident management, that same person also is responsible for dealing with changes at some level. If you run an operations center and you're in a NOC, as an example, or a systems operations center, you want to be able to communicate with people to verify impact of issues, resolve quick things, know who is the right person to call for a particular type of issue. If you've ever seen people run books, they pretty much look like a giant yellow pages sort of thing, where you're going through there saying, if you have this problem with this application, call this guy, right? And you're digging through your corporate directory, you're like, that guy has retired 10 years ago, right? Who is really the person I need to call right now? So those sorts of conditions really become problematic. If you deal with major incidents, so if you've ever been on kind of like a major, the proverbial shit has hit the fan sort of scenario, I guess I should have pointed out earlier, I tend not to have much of a filter, so I curse sometimes in my presentations. But if you're in that scenario, you just pull in everyone you need to. There's no rules, right? I've actually been on client calls where I'll embed myself in their team for a little bit of time, and you see this scenario where they're like, they have a major outage, and all of a sudden there's 250 people on a conference call. How you actually possibly solve a problem with that many people on a conference call, I have no idea how that actually works. I was there and I still don't know how it works, but that's actually part of the process. But they have clear rules. Who do we engage? How many people do we engage? What's the quorum that we need to actually get started? Those sorts of rules tend to come into play. If you deal with batch jobs or any sort of job scheduling sorts of activities, those have their own requirements. And there's the people sort of things. If you go down the list and they say, what is important to you as a person when you need to be communicated to? There's some very important things. Remember that slide of where you might be? There are some places where you just don't want to be woken up. You're like, look, if it's not for me specifically, then why am I getting this message, right? Don't wake me up in the middle of the night if I don't have to be woken up. Or equally importantly, if I should have been woken up, I don't want to find out the next morning, right? Those are the same sort of scenarios you run into. You kind of wind up with almost conflicting things, right? Like if you go down the list of requirements people have on their wish list, that say, I want less stuff, I want less noise, but don't forget about me, right? So you don't want to miss out on stuff either. Don't spam me, don't disturb me, right? You kind of wind up and they have different rules for different devices. My phone shouldn't ring unless it's super important. At the same time, I also don't want to be under different conditions for different sorts of activities. That's kind of important for those sorts of checklists. Now, when we actually put all these pieces together, simple processes start to actually get pretty complicated. So when you look at it from an outside perspective, right? If I go and talk to a client, I say, what do you do when something breaks? They're like, we fix it, right? It's pretty simple. That's what we look into in a technology perspective, right? Server down, application broken, something slow. What are we trying to do? We're trying to fix it. The reality is it's not actually a straight line, right? So when you actually draw out the process, actually map this out kind of using this is kind of a combination of different team sorts of things. It's not a path from point A to point B. It's this twisty, turny road that looks like some crazy map from Lord of the Rings. You're not really sure where there's elves and where there's orcs. I actually don't know where I get started, right? And it can start from something as simple as detection. Did we actually see the problem? Did our monitoring pick it up, right? At what layer did we pick it up? Did we pick it up at infrastructure? Did we pick it up at APM? Did we pick it up at external monitoring? Did we pick it up at real user monitoring? That comes in at the alerting level. And then if it impacts a service, like someone is actually going to feel something is gone wrong, whether it's slow or not available, that then becomes an incident, right? As an example, from a lifestyle perspective. If it's an incident, who needs to know about it? Well, the guy who's got to go out and fix it probably needs to know. If it's impacting a bunch of people, you want to notify them before they call you, right? It's kind of the old telecom outage. If you've ever had a cable outage and you pick up your phone, you call them and they say, we are aware of an outage in your neighborhood. That is so frustrating. You're like, if you knew there was an outage, why did I have to wait on hold for 20 minutes to find out, right? Why couldn't you tell me? Kind of proactively letting people know when they are impacted and you know about it. Then notifying the stakeholders. You don't want someone saying, I don't know that no one told me there was a problem. I assumed everything was fine. All those sorts of things happen. You have calls that take place. There's a ticketing process, the assignment process, the handoffs that take place, the resolution work, confirming the resolution, and all those involve lots of different communications. That checklist that I had up earlier, if you go down there and you say, well, once I find out what the problem is, if it's an emergency change I have to roll out, someone's got to approve it, all those sorts of steps involve lots of different communication elements, and that's really what our company focuses on, and that's one of the things that, from a process standpoint, I talk about to a lot of people. How do you actually handle this process? Because if you go from the previous view, point A to point B, seems nice and simple, right? That should take you, if you assume each one of those dots is like a minute, 10 minutes and we're good, right? The reality is very, very different. There's a lot more dots than people think about, right? So to actually get from point A to point B takes a lot longer than people think. And the larger an organization is, the more complicated a service is, the more distributed it is, the more steps that have to take place and the longer it takes. And if you can make things better, because we all work better with more effective communication, the better we do at it, the more quickly we can resolve those sorts of things. And of course, I always like to have the example of that's a great process and however things work. When really bad things happen, that's when all bets are off, right? So I love to use this example. A lot of people actually don't notice. Like people just think, oh, when two trucks collide, that's a major incident. The key there is, of course, the Mentos and the Coke, right? That's a much bigger problem. That's like a major incident on two different levels. So under those sorts of conditions, really what you're looking for is to have other processes in place that override your normal approaches, but still take advantage of knowledge you build up in-house about how to connect with the right people at the right time. That's where things get really, really interesting. Now, I could talk about this in theory all day long, but one of the things I really enjoy doing is sharing some of the customer stories that I have. So, you know, I'm CTO at xMatters, but I probably spend half of my time, if not more, with our clients. Sometimes spending, you know, 2 or 3 days with them, seeing how they run their technology businesses. Sometimes it's just a couple hours learning about how they run stuff. It's technology, consulting sorts of things. I have a decent amount of practical experience with this stuff, and it also helps keep me current as far as what's happening with real problems today, right? So the problems that I was helping solve in the field with IBM in the, I guess I'll date myself a little bit here, in the late 90s and the early 2000s, those aren't the same problems that people deal with today when they're running technology infrastructure, right? The world kind of changes pretty quickly. That's one way for me to stay current with today's scenarios. I do spend half my time with clients. So I use some client stories to tell you an example of what are some of the key things that drive decisions for different reasons around communication. So how many of you are familiar with Centrica? You're familiar with Centrica? They're basically a vertically integrated energy company. They have some operations here in the US, but largely they work out of the UK. They're a fairly large organization. They run like, I think it's a 1,000-person technology staff, if I recall. So they're fairly surprising. It's amazing how many big companies there are that no one knows about. I run into this all the time. I visit a client and I'm like, oh, I assume you're like a relatively small shop. They're like, yeah, we're a $50 billion company. I'm like, oh my, right? You just have no idea. So in their environment, what they were looking for in their communication system was a couple of key things. Well, the first thing that they wanted was they were looking for a SaaS platform. They were actually a client of xMatters from way back in the day when we used to sell like on-premises sorts of software that they installed. What they were looking for was to retire that approach and move everything to kind of be on demand as they needed it for a couple of reasons. One, because when they're experiencing a technology outage, if the technology they rely on to notify people and communicate with people, if that is in the same place where they're having an outage, there's a little bit of a problem, right? It's kind of all your eggs in one basket. Well, it just turns out that basket and the eggs are, the basket is also an egg. So the whole thing is kind of going to be very, very, very fragile. So they want something that was external to them that they can rely on. Lots of other reasons as well. It gives them much more the ability to deal with, they have to worry about upgrades and dealing with scalability and elasticity and new communication channels. It simply becomes available to them as the service expands over time. The other thing that was critical to them was integrations. So for them, when they looked at, and some of these are pretty closely related, one of the most important things to them was having a place where they could go through and say, what happened with this incident? And the place where they did that was their ticketing system, right? So whether you use Nagios Incident Management, or you use ServiceNow, or you use an HP system, or use Zendesk, whatever you use as your ticketing system, that kind of becomes, for instance, the place of record. So if you want to know, look, I paged out Joe at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he didn't respond until 3 o'clock in the morning. Turned out he wasn't the right guy. He said go to his manager to find the right guy. It handed off 5 different times, and that's why it took 8 hours to close this particular incident. You want to know that. And you don't want to dig through random logs to figure that out. You want it in your system of record, right? And that's what they looked at it as. So one of the key things for them was integrations, and having integrations that made it so they could track when people got messages, on what devices, how they responded, and moving things forward in a single place of record. And for them, it was actually ServiceNow, is where they actually tagged all that stuff. And they didn't want an audit trail. So the example they gave was, look, we actually have had legit issues from a cultural perspective because someone will get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. They pick up the phone because it's an urgent thing. They hear the message that says, hey, we're experiencing a performance degradation in our US facility, it's blah, blah, blah. And they hear the message and like, I just don't want to deal with this right now. And they just hang up the phone. Like, someone else is going to pick this up. Well, they want a trail of that, right? They want to know, hey, our primary responders tend not to actually deal with the issue. They wait for their backup to pick it up. They're like, someone else in the NOC is going to grab this for me, right? Because and in their case, it was actually a cultural thing built by over-alerting. People would get so many alerts, they just figured, someone else has got this, I'm sure. I'm tired tonight, I'm going to pass, right? So one of the things for them was going back to the list of, don't disturb me unless it's for me. That was very important to them, but they wanted an audit trail to be able to track that. It was also very important for them to have data very closely synchronized. They had a real security concern. I have an outage, and remember they deal with like energy security stuff as well, right? So if you're basically tracking gas pipelines and there's information about those monitoring systems that you're seeing, hey, we're actually seeing a little bit of an issue there, you could potentially trigger an alarm saying we might have a gas explosion in this area. Could cause panic, right? Someone joins the company, they leave in 2 weeks. They were part of the team, and they're part of the notification schedule. Now they're gone, right? How do you keep the systems very current? So synchronization was very important to them. tying it into their local directory services, to their rotation teams, made sure that they only notified people that really were supposed to be in the know. So that was kind of the critical things for them. Sky is actually another UK company that's coincidentally 2 companies that are out of the UK in order. They're basically the equivalent of DirecTV, right? Maybe a little bit different because they have got some LAN services as well, but effectively they're a telecom and media company based out of the UK. For them, they had a whole different set of reasons as far as why they were looking at this sort of thing. For them, it was transparency and accountability. They're like, look, we have a team that's distributed everywhere. We've got field techs running around all over the place. It's very difficult to know of everybody who's on shift covering this particular postal code, aka zip code, right? We don't know who's actually working on this field issue. So we want to have transparency about, of the 10 people it could be, who is the person? So I'm not calling a bunch of techs saying, hey, are you the one who's got this thing? Who's actually working on this particular issue? If you've got 3 guys, you want to know that there's 3 people who are involved. They also wanted accountability, similar to the previous scenario. When you look at the across the board, who responds to issues more quickly and who says, I'm busy, escalate to my backup, they wanted accountability, right? Who is actually taking the work? Because what they found was on some teams, they had a combination of people who were like actual heroes because they would take all the stuff themselves. And there were other guys that loved to take stuff and never finish it, right? So they were very good at taking things, but not really finishing them off. It's like a Seinfeldism, right? Anyone can take a reservation, but no one can really finish it off, and no one can really hold on to it, right? That's the important thing. So finishing is important. So they're trying to get the data on who actually takes the most work, who rejects it, and by tying it into their communication framework, they're able to pull that stuff together. And that's where their reporting and analytics pieces come into play. Across a team, they could say, in the field team, in this region, who are the people that respond the most quickly for major issues, for regular issue, for changes, for customer service requests, for redirects, for last minute installs, helping out senior citizens. Those sorts of things were important to them. It's actually really weird. We deal with a lot of media companies who specifically have filters for seniors, because they're like, look, for them, like a TV outage for me is like, all right, I guess I'll go outside, got nothing to do, we'll go for a run or something, right? If you're like 90 years old and you're like, the TV is kind of my connection to the outside world, that can be pretty freaky, right? Like my TV's out. If someone says, I'm not gonna install TV for you for a week, like that could be pretty serious, right? So they actually prioritize. It's interesting, I actually see this with some of the more progressive media companies. They actually prioritize some of their older customers automatically, which is kind of cool, I think. That's kind of that example. You're probably familiar with Cash America, payday loans, title loans, that sorts of stuff. They actually have, I'm always surprised by how many locations they do have. They have like multiple thousands of locations in the country, right? Just a crazy footprint. And for them, their list is very different. So for them, they look at it as, we have so many people, and our people that work in these stores are pretty low tech, right? These are not like guys who have a bunch of technology skills that can fix stuff themselves. When things go wrong, you have to dispatch people. Smallest thing, right? I don't know what's going on, the computer won't turn on. I tried kicking it, nothing happened, right? Someone's got to come and take a look at it. That's not to kind of downplay the skills of those people, but technology is not their thing, right? They're there basically to go through and service their clients. And a lot of that involves financial credit checks and should I give this person a loan or not? So those sorts of things are very technology dependent. When there's an outage, that store is not doing business entirely, right? So it's very critical to have rapid responses. But because they've got so many people running out, mobility was one of their key things. So they wanted to make sure they had a way to deliver rich, secure content to people wherever they are. So they actually give out everybody mobile devices. They have mobile apps. People can respond in context of different issues. They've got a rich set of response libraries. So something as simple as, here's an outage. How quickly can you be there? It's not just OK to say, yeah, I've got this. You would say, yeah, I've got this, and I'll be there in 10 minutes, right? Or I've got this, and I'll be there in 15 or 12. And they use that to redirect people as well. So it's very, very important for them to have very detailed data. So their responses are very, very structured. They also wind up in scenarios where, like Cash America locations, can wind up in some rural areas where they don't necessarily have great, we take for granted, like got like LTE coverage everywhere I go. That's not the case everywhere, right? So sometimes you wind up in scenarios where there's pretty low data bandwidth. So they actually count on lower bandwidth kind of burst communications like SMS to actually get people's attention there as well. And the other thing that matters to them is because we've got so many stores, right? It's kind of like we've got so many things, there's just more things that are going to go wrong, right? They have more edge routers than really most people ever have to worry about. They've got more campus location, more branch offices essentially to deal with. So when they look at their consoles, and I see this all the time, by the way, when you look at when you walk into an operations center and you see the console up on the big screen, there's a whole bunch of red there. And there's 5 guys in the room who know that 80% of that red is meaningless. They're like, yeah, that stuff's already being worked on. Don't worry about it. But someone coming at it from the outside looks at it and goes, the sky must be falling. Everything is red. What's going on, right? So one of the really cool things that they want to do was go through and say when people actually respond from their mobile devices or respond to a text message, say, I've got this, I've fixed this, don't worry about it, that's a false alarm, as people are validating, it actually feeds all the way back and flags those alerts. So even before the monitoring picks up that it's been resolved, you can actually go through and close those things out or act them and clean them up. So their views are much more what is unacknowledged and still open in their consoles. So their consoles actually look, it's kind of freaky, but they actually have a lot more green than red. Because the responses that anyone gives out from any notifications actually updates their consoles. And that was very important to them. They actually wanted a current console. And the reason it's important, going way back to my CBP sorts of story, is if you have accurate consoles, you can actually mine that data to give you good service states, which you can share with other people who are outside of IT, right? It's okay within IT for people who know the technology to actually go through and say, it's a bunch of red, don't worry about it, we got it covered. Those things aren't really service impacting. If you take that same sort of view and you present it on kind of like a business level dashboard, a lot of red is bad. No matter how much you try to explain, don't worry, this red is okay, we've got this red covered, that's bad. You might as well do like a color switch and switch all the reds to greens, right? And that's what we're trying to do, is keep the information current and real so it's actually actionable for people outside the technology group. Baptist is a healthcare organization who we work with, like a lot of other healthcare groups we wind up working with. For them, it was all about the people runbooks. So they actually have the scenario where if you go into an operations center or really at the service desk or anyone who needs someone, they have these massive libraries of documents that tell people who to go. If you're having an experience with our electronic health record system, here's the project team, here's the guy who's a lead, here's everyone who worked with them, here's the people who are on the database side, here's a contractor who's worked with us. It literally, it's pretty much like a book, right? It happens to be like a document on SharePoint, but it's pretty much, that's what it is, right? And you have to go through, if you see a problem, you first identify where you think the problem might be, you refer to the runbook, and you figure out who to notify. Well, that means from something showing up as the blinking red light on the screen saying bad things are happening, to actually determining where it is and figuring out who the person is in the runbook, looking up the corporate directory, calling them and saying, hey, can you take a look at this? For that person to say, dude, I moved off that project 2 months ago. Right? Like, damn it, next guy, right? You go to the next person. From the time the light starts blinking until you even have the right person that says, yeah, that's me, I know about this, let me take a look at it, that could be 45 minutes, right? Now consider the types of services they're running, right? So you're running a critical service that's checking in patients, looking stuff up. That can actually impact healthcare scenarios, right? So today, I actually have a bunch of active meetings that I've had this week with our healthcare clients talking about Ebola, right? They're like, hey, we've actually got the scenario where we have a set of services that we're rolling out that are new, that we weren't planning on rolling out, things like, plans to execute in the event of bad, like Ebola sorts of scares. Well, those services are not ones that we've typically used a lot, and now they're getting hit very hard. We've got all of our hospitals that all of a sudden you say, that's part of the repository we'll look at whenever. Now they're hitting it hard. Those services are fluctuating in availability. I can't have a response time to that application issue being held back by 45 minutes to find the right person who knows what to do, right? So they're trying to shorten that window very, very quickly. If you don't get the right person to look at the blinking red light, the light's going to keep on blinking, right? So that's where it becomes important to engage with the right people. So for them, what they did was rolled out a whole series of automation elements into it. First of all, they took every single team and said, okay, every team is 24/7. Within your team, I don't want to know that I can call all 10 of you and someone will take the work. Not acceptable, right? I want to know who the first guy is, who the second guy is, their backup is, and I'm going to their manager, right? What that means is if you're first person on deck, guess what? The other 9 people on the team, you get to sleep all night, right? Unless multiple things happen, then maybe 8 of you sleep all night, right? So the idea there is it's good for the people on the team. It's good for the operations center because they know who the person is. And in fact, they don't have to know who it is because it's all automated in a system. They simply say, get me someone from the Cerner database team. And boom, they're engaged, right? You don't worry about the details. That's kind of captured in the system. If that person doesn't respond in 5 minutes, they don't have to go through and say, well, now the timer is up, let me call the next person. They're able to go out and engage with that person as they'd like to. So you can the escalations are built in. They also have dynamic groups. I want someone with these skills. I need someone who is in northern Mississippi, has worked on our EHR system, is network savvy, and by the way, is someone who knows something about our medical conditions because they've worked on it for a while. So they can go in and specify those skills, and the system knows who to contact. They're building the information into it to get people automation. They also do geotagging. That is an example of that northern Mississippi thing, right? They actually geotag people to go through and say, who is actually the person who's closest to the issue, who's got that thing, let me engage them as well. And the idea there is to reduce that sort of manual effort to figure out where to go for those sorts of things. You guys are probably familiar with this company, right? Telecom, media, giant company. They're actually one of our larger clients. For them, they actually started off using our system for something very, very basic, which is collaboration. So when there's an outage on Comcast, and one of the things if you work enough with a lot of larger companies, is you realize sometimes you don't want to know how the sausage is made. It's kind of like going to a restaurant. Don't go into the kitchen in your favorite restaurant. It's the worst thing you can do to yourself. But in this scenario, when you actually see how some organizations run their collaboration, it can be a little bit scary. So my first interaction with Comcast in this context was when they're talking about their collaboration efforts. When something major would happen in their network, the things we were going, why is my internet not working? Why is my home phone out? Why don't I have TV? When it impacts like a large reason, they actually have like a major incident process that they go through within their core team. Not the field guys that go out and work stuff, but if it's like a core network sort of problem. It would take them 45 minutes to engage the people to start the process. So cable goes out, takes 45 minutes before you even have people to start saying what's actually happening. Because that was their rules. That a process said we need a quorum of specialists together to figure this out. They also had a service support and kind of an executive sort of team. So when we call and we say, hey, there's an outage in your area, the guys who kind of know the details of what's really going on, they sit on a separate call. Assembling both those calls, typically the population, first of all, was anywhere from 25 for a small thing to 250 for a large one. That's the number of people they have on those calls. Waiting to get the right set of people, because they're like, well, I can't get started until I've got an in-region, someone who knows like the CMTS structure in this area. I need this skill set in here. Until they're there, you're going nowhere fast. 45 minutes, right, till anything happens at all. When they rolled out our system, they basically said, I'm going to build in all of our organizational knowledge in there for major incidents, 90 seconds, right? 2 minutes max is how long you have to escalate between people. So I'm going to call a person who should know. If they don't respond saying they'll be on the call, naturally the system calls them to say, you're needed on a major incident conference call, press 1 to join the call now, and it pulls you in automatically. There's no, I'll dial back in later. It calls you, right? If you don't respond, within 2 minutes, boom, it's your backup. It's logged saying you were supposed to be primary, you weren't. I went to your backup because you only have 2 minutes to respond. Now their window assembly is down to sub 10 minutes. What that means is for people at home, right, add up kind of the time. The number of times, the amount of people that are waiting to call about a major outage goes down significantly because they're able to actually have the information at hand to say, here's what's going on, here's how long it's going to fix it. That's how they really look at the service. The other thing I mentioned was 250 people on a call, right? That's what I would classify that as mild over-engagement, right? Which is, you don't really need 250 people on a call. But what they're doing is they'd say, we'll notify everybody, and then when they all get on the call, they'll be like, we only need one person from your team, so why don't the other 20 of you drop off? The other 20 people, I would be freaking out if I was on that team, right? Especially if it's in the middle of the night. It happens all the time. Literally something like that happens multiple times a week. Crazy, right? But their goal was, we can do better for our people and still provide better service to our customers. So that's kind of the goal over there. And what we're looking for was analytics to figure out which teams are working better so they could adjust the on-call schedules. Should we give someone 2 minutes to respond, 3 minutes to respond, 5? Who respond? Should we have 2 on call, 3 on call, 1 on call? What are the rules? They use the analytics to actually optimize their teams over time. The big thing for them was elasticity. Comcast tends to grow. They're trying to grow pretty significantly right now, right? So they want something that, for them, a SaaS solution makes sense because it gave them the elasticity that they needed as well. This is the last one. I know we're getting close to time here, so I'll speed things up a little bit. But this Manpower is an organization. They actually staff out over 2 million people in the country. They're actually a massive staffer of resources. For them, what they were looking for was they had all their tools alerting individually. So if you've ever been on the receiving end of automated alerts from IT management systems, we've all done this. I had a filter that would actually take all those alerts and throw them in the trash. Because if it was something important, someone would send me an email with that notification saying, hey, boss, you really should look at this particular one. The automated ones, all in the trash. Because they went to so many people, they were pointless. And there were so many, they were complete noise. So what they were looking for was to build a hub where they could tie all their systems into one place. And then it would notify people based on automated priorities. So they have APM tools, server monitoring tools, network stuff, automation systems, everything feed into one place. All the rules of who to notify, because everyone has multiple roles, all run in one place. All the escalations are in there as well. And what they do is they have different tools have different notification content. So for what you send out as an alert for a batch job is different than from a change request, different from an incident, different from a security outage, different from an IPS thing, different from a network issue. So you have to tailor what goes into the message, what the message looks like per device, what the responses are to be in tune with that sort of setup as well. That's pretty important to them. And it's all the way fed back. So when you respond and say, restart the job, download the logs, run this Puppet script to go out and fix this, all those things feed back into the source systems. They can then track to see which one of the responses are working and roll more of those things out. They actually run a pretty tight shop from that perspective. So hopefully that was helpful going through lots of different examples. I like to kind of summarize things on kind of things that fit in one hand. But in this case, I had a few more than one hand. So this is kind of a mute in one hand. But it kind of works. It's like 7 things. I'll just bring them all up here real quick, just kind of run through them here since we're a little tight on time. But when you look at all those different customer stories and different examples of what really takes to be effective, to have an effective communication strategy to engage your team, to resolve things more quickly and provide a better technology service, there's some very important elements that are common across all of them. Integrations. Integrations is super key. So if you have whatever monitoring infrastructure you're using, whether you've got from one vendor, from 2, from a dozen, whatever the scenario is, whether you're talking changes, incidents, jobs, different tool sets, integrating those into a central place is important. And having it go end-to-end is very important as well. It's not helpful to go through and say, oh, the system notifies using xMatters, but if you want to find out what actually happened, you go to the xMatters logs. That's kind of pointless, right? You want it in a system of record because it makes it so everything is in one place when you actually going back and looking at it. One other common theme, if you just take the current noise you send out and you simply start blasting it out through text messages and phone calls and mobile alerts, you're simply going to drive people crazy. People will be smashing their phones, right? It doesn't help. You have to have, as a pattern of this, reduction of noise has to be is a critical component. Driving collaboration is key, right? So whether you're talking about pulling people into a Yammer discussion, pulling them into a link group or a conference call or a Slack session, whatever you're using for collaboration, that's a key piece of this, right? So you want to tie the system into your collaboration pieces as well. Having a generic message that says, something is wrong, log into system to see, completely useless, right? All you're doing is you're saying, you woke me up to tell me to go do something else. That's still taking me the same amount of time. So the content that you deliver and the responses you provide have to be tailored for the context and for the person. I don't want to send an IT message to an executive or a detailed tech. I don't want to send the details of an SNMP trap and some specific MIBs to a business analyst who's going to look at it and go, I don't know what this means. Are things good? Are they bad? Is the sky falling? Makes no sense. So it's got to be tailored. That's very important, the solution you choose. I can't overemphasize mobility. It's amazing to me how many clients I walk through who've got these amazing BYOD policies and stuff, but their IT teams use their mobile devices that they can choose whatever they want, except all they can use it for is email, right? As far as corporate stuff is concerned. Yeah, and for personal stuff, I could run my life on my phone, right? For work stuff, most people look at it and go, all it does is email. That's all it is, right? I can't do anything else. So tying it to have actually a mobile app that does those sorts of communications for you is pretty important. Security and compliance. I see this a lot for us because I tend to focus on a lot of our Global 2000 clients. That's really the majority of our sorts of clients. So I have clients that literally will come through and ask for certifications. They run pen tests against our service every single year, their own. Not cheap to actually do. It costs you like 50 grand to do a good one. They actually run them themselves because if you're using the service to notify about critical issues within technology, those are critical business issues which contain sensitive information. Could be health information, could be security sorts of stuff, all kinds of different conditions. So having a secure system for communication itself is pretty important. So security is important. We go through a lot of compliance stuff with a lot of our clients as well. That comes into play. And just doing stuff for the hell of doing it is pointless. So unless you've got a strong reporting and analytics backend that lets you get better over time, that's really the only way to do it, right? If you do it the first way and you think you've got it perfect, you're delusional, right? You have to basically go back and tune over time, and that's what the analytics allow you to do. We focus a lot on reporting and analysis within the service. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions. I always get this question, so I always put this up on here. One of the questions I won't take is, hey, did you know you look like Ray Romano or Cal Penn from Harold and Kumar? So other than that question, I'm happy to take any questions you guys might have at this point.
Questions for Abbas? Any comments? Is there anything you're working on currently? Any upcoming projects you're excited about?
Yeah, so we're always doing all kinds of cool stuff. You know, and some of the customer stories we talk about, there's lots of interesting details on there. I put that on there because you can always check out our website for some of those details. I tend not to go into as much product-specific details. I'm more outcome-focused. But a lot of things that we do really are designed to really take the technology infrastructure used to monitor, to track stuff, to really optimize things, and use the data in there to engage with people better, right? So it doesn't help if you've got the best monitoring system in the world and you've got the ultimate blinking red light that tells you you've got a problem. Until you've got the right person engaged to address it, to look at that light and fix things, you've accomplished literally nothing, right? And that's what we really focus on, is optimizing the people side of it and the automation on that front. And that's really the goal of everything that we do. In terms of technology stuff, I'm really excited about a lot of cool stuff that we're doing on the mobile front. You know, I push a lot of our own teams internally to go out and do more and more with that, because there is just so much more that people can do. Like I said, I am surprised by how little technology people do for their own companies with mobile devices that they could be doing so much more for. And it's just a function of there really aren't anything that really address a lot of their needs. You're like, how many tools can I simply publish mobile consoles for just to have to get more push alerts that do nothing? The kind of routing information to the right people. We do a lot of deep linking between mobile apps. We talk about that as well. So if you have, as an example, I actually don't know if Nagios has a mobile app, but if you wanted to, you could actually have, and if they're deep linkable, you could actually have like an xMatters alert that comes in that says, here's what's going on. If you want more details, click here, and it takes you into other apps in context. That's kind of work that we really like to do, is make sure that people are able to do things from wherever they are, because you'll recall my top 5 places. You want to be able to get things as much as stuff as you want done wherever you are, even if you happen to be on the throne at the time. All right, thanks guys. With that, I'll turn back whatever time we got left.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Abbas, please put your hands together. Thank you very much.